What was your "I can't believe I have to explain this to an adult" moment? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. My mom set up her phone to unlock using her fingerprint, except she scanned her index fingerprint and then tried to unlock it with her thumb. It didn't work and she couldn't understand why. A few years later, I was telling my boyfriend this story, and he also didn't understand why it wouldn't unlock. So I've met two adults that didn't know their fingerprints were different on each finger. Story 2. Working at a computer store around 2014. Rich-looking lady shows up complaining that she's having issues with her Microsoft Surface tablet. She explains that she's got no problem with it at home, but whenever she leaves, she doesn't have internet anymore. At first, I assumed she had the version of the tablet with a SIM card and it wasn't set properly, but no, she had the standard version. She expected her home Wi-Fi to work everywhere. I tried for 15 minutes to explain to her how Wi-Fi worked, but she would have none of it. She thought I was treating her like an idiot. Not at first, but after 20 minutes of her not understanding Wi-Fi, I for sure was, and asked to speak to my manager. 20 minutes later, I saw her still arguing with my manager. Story 3. I once bartended at a brewery and served two customers, 2 pints of beer with different glass shapes. The one paying for the drinks smirked at me and said, "We both ordered a pint." I told him they were both pints. Then he laughed and said, "You expect me to believe they're the same? They don't look the same?" It took me grabbing 2 different empty pint glasses, filling one with water, then pouring the water into the other glass, for the guy to understand the basic concept of volume. Story 4. I had to explain twice about things being stuck to screens to someone after they called IT and complained twice about unclearable error messages on their screens. First one was a post-it note someone had stuck to her screen. The second was the faceplate of an exit sign that had fallen on the floor, and someone had leaned up against her screen so she'd know to call maintenance to have it put back up. It was confusing trying to decipher over the phone why there's a green error and a man running out a door until I went over to see it for myself. Story 5. Every single day I worked in tech support. I said this to myself multiple times a day. I scanned this handwritten sheet of notes into the computer. Why can't I delete the writing on it and type different words? Okay, so a picture of a sheet of notebook paper isn't edit. I don't want to hear your excuses. You're the help desk. You should be helping me. My computer is running very slow. Why? Okay, when's the last time you shut down your computer? Not just close the laptop, but actually fully shut it down? I don't do that. Okay, well, if it's been a very long time, that is probably your issue. Why do you not want to shut down your system? Hey, I'll lose all my work. Oh, shutting a computer down doesn't erase saved files. As long as you're saving and backing up important work, a shutdown won't lose you anything. I don't save my work. It takes too much time, and I can never find anything once it's closed. Ew, so to be clear, you don't turn off your computer or save anything? What's your process for working? Woman proceeds to show me a desktop completely covered edge to edge and stacked multiple icons deep of screenshots. Unnamed. Just thousands of screenshot 12, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, etc. forever. It looked like MC Escher took acid and tried making art on her desktop. Word was open in about 100 tabs of unsaved documents. It was anxiety made physical. I took a picture of it and still may have it somewhere. I was so gobsmacked. This computer could have inspired a Philip K. Dick style crossover with Old Yeller, where a computer tries its best and wants to do a good job, but in the end yearns for some merciful soul to take a hammer to its processor to end its eternal suffering. This person was the dean of a college. She ripped my ass a new one when we finally got her computer off her to update it. In all my years of extensive customer service training, I couldn't find a way to actually get through to her that doing this to her computer was horrendous, not just for the machine, but from a data privacy and data loss standpoint. It made me lose so much faith in humanity that this person was making over 100K while I was making 35. Story 6. When I worked at a video store, a customer came in to return the copy of Wizard of Oz that they had rented, stating I wanted the color version. This one is in black and white. I asked how much of it they had watched. Just a few minutes. Story 7. I once got chastised for instructions I wrote because I assumed go to website.com was clear enough. Apparently, they needed instruction to find the URL bar, type in the website's address, and press enter. Apparently, this person has never used a website that wasn't an automatic preset. Story 8. I was working for a publishing firm. A fax was coming in and I was standing behind the office manager waiting for the fax to complete when my eyes idly went to her computer screen. She had the accounting program up and she had the mailing program up and she was manually typing an address from the accounting program into the mailing program. I asked her why she didn't just copy from the accounting program and paste into the mailing program instead of typing the whole thing out. She stared at me blankly. She had been the office manager of this publishing firm for over 10 years, and she didn't know about copy-paste. Hundreds of boxes of books going out every day, and she had typed every single address by hand until that moment. Story 9. When I was in second grade, 7 years old, we had a substitute teacher who was telling us about the sun and the moon, and how the sun comes out during the day and the moon comes out at night. So I raise my hand and ask why the moon is sometimes out during daytime also, to which she responds, "That's not possible since the moon only comes out after the sun goes down." I tell her I've seen the moon out during the daytime though, but she insists that's impossible. Then other kids start chiming in that they think they've seen the moon during the day too. And at this point, the teacher's getting kind of upset, and I think she thinks I'm just trying to be a class clown or something and get the class riled up. She says, "Well, I've never in my life seen the moon out during the day." So I get up out of my seat and walk over to the window and point at the moon, clearly visible in the sky right there. The rest of the class jumps up out of their chairs to confirm LOL. The teacher seemed truly baffled at that point. Like, how in her 40 or so years of life had she never once noticed the moon in the sky? Story 10 new. When my sister and I were watching the live-action Lion King, she made a comment wondering how many trainers it took to get all the different animals to stay in their places and perform on cue. I stared at her in shock as I explained to her that the animals are all CGI, and there would never be a way to get all those different animals in one place without absolute disaster. She had to Google it before believing me. My sister is 47. Story 11. How a greeting card worked. Like how a piece of paper could be folded in half to create an outside and inside. One of those moments where my brain broke because I couldn't figure out how to explain such a simple concept to a grown-ass upper manager at my job. Story 12. I used to teach GED classes to adult men, convicted felons, in a prison. I want to preface this by saying that I do not intend for this story to be condescending in any way, as we all come from different walks of life and have different abilities, talents. I was always very proud of every one of my students. Anyway, the story. In math geometry, we're doing a unit on surface area and volume of rectangular prisms. Most of my students tended to do better with hands-on learning, so I had a bunch of wooden blocks and rulers for them so they could measure, then calculate. It turned out that very few of them could read a ruler aside from the inch and the half-inch marks. I picked up on this and changed gears pretty quickly, so I taught them all how to read rulers and tape measures that day. We had the same issue with every class each group throughout the day, which was fine. We did the surface area and volume project the next day. I ended up making rulers, jury measurement part of my standard curriculum, even though it wasn't explicitly on the GED test. A pretty large percentage of my students were bound to join the trades, and it would be a very useful thing for them to know. Story 13. So many people don't understand the origin of their food. Someone told me, "Why do we need farmers anyway? We can just go to the grocery store to get food." And I asked her where she thought the food comes from, and she looked at me and said, "Dim, are you slow? I just said the grocery store." I had to explain that beef is cow meat. He kept saying the cow was the animal. We don't eat cow. Beef is just beef. When I asked him what animal he thought beef comes from, he said he doesn't know, but it isn't a cow. Someone asked if a ham, a cube-shaped ham, was processed or not. I was like, "No, lady, the pigs just come out that shape, in the wrapper and everything." How do you look at something that is cube-shaped, is just meat and nothing else, and ask if it was processed in any way? How do you think it got to the cube shape? A woman refused to believe chicken wings are a thing because chickens can't fly. I have been asked by many people why cows always produce milk, and all were crazy shocked when I told them they don't. They only produce after birth, like all the other mammals. I had to explain that not all chicken eggs are fertilized. The egg is like the egg women have. It can either be fertilized or not. The egg is not the baby. If it is fertilized, then yes, inside of it happens the process that happens inside a woman. when she is pregnant. But laying an egg isn't technically giving birth. It's technically equivalent to women menstruating if the egg isn't fertilized. Many people don't realize you can pick up apples, oranges, any fruit that grows on a tree, and eat it. I once asked someone if I could eat an apple from their tree, and they told me no because it is not safe because it isn't from a store. He would let all apples go to waste because he never realized it's the same kind of apple as in the store. Someone told me they drink raw milk and noticed it's actually better if you boil it. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me it is so much better to drink it like that than from the store. I asked her what pasteurization was, and she said it was the process of adding chemicals into the milk. I had to explain that eggs aren't dairy. Just because they are sold in the dairy section doesn't mean they are a dairy product. Dairy products are derived products from milk. I was shocked at how many people never knew this. On the note, there are people who don't realize cheese isn't vegan or that mayo isn't vegan. Heck, I've even met a vegan who didn't know eggs were not vegan. I have so many more, but conclusion is that we desperately need to educate people about the food they eat, what it is, and where it comes from. Story 14. I'm from Australia. I met another Aussie friend in London. She was out of breath as we walked up Tower Bridge. She then explained it was due to the altitude of London. No, darling, you traveled north, not up. Story 15. I had to explain to a grown man that despite looking to be the same size as the moon at certain times, the sun is, in fact, larger than both the moon and Earth. He couldn't wrap his head around it being larger than Earth because it looks so small in the sky. The disbelief on his face when I explained that you could fit 1 million Earths inside the sun and it only looked small because it was 93 million miles away was amazing. Story 16. That you can clean or wash most things. A co-worker of mine freaked out when I had to pile personal belongings to the side in order to access supplies and insisted I not let jackets touch his bag because the body odor could transfer. I calmly said he could move the bag or wash it if he was so worried about it. You can wash a backpack? You can wash a lot of stuff. He very shyly admitted he just learned that sheets should be washed. I asked him how often he was washing them before. The look of horror and regret with the whispered never will haunt me. Story 17. I live in a country where getting a meeting with HR after calling in sick 3 times in 6 months is normal. It's just to check to see if everything is okay or if a consultation with the occupational physician is needed. In part, to be proactive as an employee can get up to 2 years paid sick leave, and nobody wants to be sick that long. Usually those HR meetings are not a big deal, just protocol. I get one of those meetings because I once had a migraine and a 40 degrees Celsius fever twice. I rarely get a fever, but my kid had just started kindergarten, so I was exposed to a lot of bugs. I called in sick for a total of 3 days in 6 months. I was told that it's biologically impossible to get a fever more than once a year. This HR lady based this on the publicly published numbers stating that the average Dutch employee calls in sick 1.2 times a year. That's not how statistics work. I had no idea where to start with this. So I started looking for a new job because this wasn't the only, I can't believe I have to explain this to an adult moment, and it wasn't the last one before I left 6 months later. Story 18. Not an adult, but still a teenager that should have already known by that age. A pad fell from my bag at school. He saw it and came to me asking what it was because he always saw them in his sister room, but everyone refused to tell him. Explained him what it was, told him it was for the menstrual cycle. Had to explain that too. He had no idea what I was talking about. And that's why I firmly believe we need this kind of education at school. Story 19. I once worked at a hostel in Canada. One day a guest paid for their room with American cash. I calculated the exchange rate and gave them their change in Canadian dollars. They looked puzzled and finally asked, "Wait, there's different money here?" I had to explain that yes, even though we both use dollars and cents, Canada has its own currency. She was young, still an adult, but completely shocked as it hit her that she was in a foreign country. She kind of freaked out. Story 20. I used to work at a cupcake store. We had rotating flavors, one of which had a black and white color palette that was named Black Tie Affair. A woman came in one day, read the names of the flavors, saw that one, and made a face. She asked why it was called that and why we had to bring race into it. I had to explain that a black tie affair is a fancy event, not an affair between a black and tie person. Story 21, I was taking a new hire through onboarding forms on my computer when she started tapping my monitor. I said it's not a touch screen and to use the mouse and keyboard. She looked at the desk, then at me and said, "What's the mouse?" She was 19 and this was in 2018. I asked how she didn't know what it is, and she explained that every device she has ever used was a touchscreen and that she has never had to use one before. Story 22. Had to talk to an adult family member about their child not washing her hands after using the bathroom. Adult family members said that they don't enforce it at home because the adults also don't wash their hands at home. I asked them, "Do you wonder if maybe that's why you're sick all the time?" It was like a bomb went off inside their skull. Story 23. I had to explain to a 60-year-old man that his car remote key fob stopped working because the battery was dead. Somehow he knew to replace the batteries in his TV remote, but thought the car key fob locked and unlocked the car without batteries. I also had to explain to him that his dog's dry food was always going bad really fast and attracting bugs and wild animals into his always open garage because he needed to actually close the bag and keep it inside a strong container with a lid that kept raccoons out, or maybe even keep it in house where you feed your dog. You don't leave your bags of cereal and chips wide open outside your house. So why do you do that with the expensive dog food you buy? Story 21. Had a friend that was in a tough situation and need a place to stay. Had to explain to her why leaving multiple dirty dishes and half-empty food wrappers in her room was a bad thing. Ironically enough, she was complaining about the fruit flies hovering around her room. Edit for reference, she was almost 32 years old. Story 25. I said to my niece and nephew, who were 10 and 5 at the time, that this was the only time in their lives that she would be twice as old as him. My SIL said, "No, what about when she is 20 and he is 10? I just looked at her, waiting for her to get it, and she didn't. Then I said that there are 7 years between her and her sister, and when she was 14, her sister was 7, twice as old. Then I said, "How old are you right now?" 42. "And how old is your sister right now?" 35. "So you are not twice as old as her?" She paused and then kind of got it. Kind of. Story 26. Fab story. My fam went to Abu Dhabi. We've been going there for years. We went to visit the Sheikh Zayed Mosque, as our friends haven't seen it yet. Security checks were added at this point where you had to show your passport, etc. So, we're Austrians, and the lady at the security tells us that our passports aren't valid as our country doesn't exist. I thought she was joking and explained to her how it would even be possible then to enter the UAE if our country wasn't real. I explained to a grown woman that Austria is in Europe and we are part of the EU. She then asks us if we have a French passport instead, because that would work. I told her how I would have a French passport if we aren't French. I was so pissed at that point. I re-explained to her that our country is like France, part of the EU, and we are next to Germany and Italy. At that point, her supervisor stepped in and let us pass. I know that in Arabic, Austria has a different name, but still, how and why? Story 27. I once had to teach a 26-year-old man who worked in a kitchen how to fry an egg. We used to do early starts and have breakfast about 10 a.m., and he'd always get me to fry an egg for him. One morning, I genuinely couldn't be arsed, so I told him to fry his own egg, to which he replied, "I don't know how. I don't know when it's done." I was genuinely shocked that a man who ate a fried egg every morning couldn't work out when one was finished cooking. Story 28. A woman thought that the paint I sold her was defective. When I asked her why, she said the can it came in was dented. After reassuring her that the paint should be fine, she wanted to know exactly why it wouldn't be damaged. I proceeded to explain physics to this 50-something-year-old lady. These people can vote, folks. Story 29. To my dad. I don't think he has ever been single. Serial cheater. You've been married 5 times. He has always had women take care of bills. Anyhow, his car was repossessed. First time being single for 6 MOS. What a record. Didn't pay his car. Ex didn't pay it. I asked him if he had been paying it, and he said, "No, that's Ex's job." No, it isn't. I had to teach him how to pay bills. He always relied on women to do it for him. He did try and flirt over the phone to also get his way, so I had to explain that. That's not how paying bills work. Ridiculous. Story 30. My 65-year-old neighbor told me she had to wait for her husband to come home so she could clean the electric stove because she didn't know how to take it apart. I showed her. Same neighbor knocked on my door, asking me to help with her newly installed washing machine. They didn't turn the water on. I showed her. She couldn't get a hold of maintenance to fix her kitchen light. I changed the bulb. When her husband was in the hospital, she knocked on my door to help her figure out how to turn the vacuum on. I helped her. One time, her husband was found passed out in the parking lot. I covered him with a blanket and sat with him until the EMTs arrived. I then went to her and told her the paperwork they needed and suggested she should get dressed out of pajamas so she could go to the hospital with him. She asked me to go with her. I said, "Honey, no, I cannot." Another time after that, she asked me to untangle her necklace that she just got for Christmas. I was going through my own shit at that time, and I had to start pushing her away for the sake of my own mental healing. Sweet, sweet lady. A little bit bonkers, but I do miss her since she's moved. I would totally untangle her necklace and wait in the emergency room with her now, if I had it to do all over. Be present with the little annoyances you have. One day you may actually wish for them. Who wants for him? Story 31. A co-worker of mine convinced his SIL, his brother also works for the company and is married to her, who is a bit of a ditz, that the big bales of hay in fields are cow eggs. When she came to a company event, I was talking to her, and the joke came up. Apparently, he had never corrected the record, and I had just assumed he had told her the truth, and that had all had a laugh. Nope. I had to tell a woman in her early 30s that, no, cows are mammals and give birth to their babies much like humans do. In fact, the platypus and echidnas are the only mammals that lay eggs. All other mammals give live birth. In her defense, she was a good sport about it, and had a great sense of humor. When I told her this, she went to my coworker, laughing and jokingly chewed him out. Story 32. My mom is a sheltered white Christian suburban lady. She homeschooled me and my siblings from the 80s, 2000s. I had to explain to her in recent years that the Democrats and Republicans essentially switched sides ideologically since the Civil War. I had to explain to her that black people didn't just suddenly get the same opportunities as white people after slavery. She was genuinely baffled by BLM and didn't understand why anyone thought racism was still an issue. I explained to her how the crack epidemic was propagated by our own government to destabilize black communities and disproportionately imprison black men. Even my staunchly conservative dad acknowledged this. My mom was incredulous about all this stuff. She does not have dementia. Story 33. Had to explain to adult A that I cannot accept their coupon because not only is it out of date by a damn year, it's not even for our cafe. Had to also explain this to adult B and C, who will be known here on in as the police, who decided to get involved when adult A started rampaging through my outside seating area and throwing chairs at people. Then had to explain to adult D, who will hear on and be known as my area manager, who decided now was a great time to visit, why I was refusing to comply with police instructions. They told me to honor the coupon. Pretty standard in hospitality. Edit. For those who asked, my area manager did back me up. She told the police off pretty hard. It was great to watch. Story 34. Many years ago, we went to the local zoo when they were having a huge dinosaur display with life-sized animatronic dinos scattered through the greenery. SEL said, "I don't understand how people manage to survive against dinosaurs." I just looked at my brother with a, "This one is all your look." Story 35. My cousin who moved to Texas from Florida to live with my family. It was Christmas time, and we naturally had tamales around. She starts going in on this tamale and then starts complaining about how she just doesn't like tamales. We had to explain to her that you're supposed to take the husk off before you eat it. Goofy ass was almost 30 at the time. Story 36. I came back from vacation to a bunch of emails from one of my vendors because she couldn't contact the shipping company I'd given her contact information for. She emailed me every day for a week. When I got back, I looked over the contact info I'd sent her and asked what problem she was having. I'd given her phone numbers, but she doesn't call. She needs an email. I called and got her an email address in 5 minutes. She was useless on this for a week because she wouldn't or couldn't or didn't think to just pick up the phone. Story 37. A few years ago, I was sitting with my friend's roommate, making small talk. I had mentioned how fall was finally coming and how excited I was. She had the most shocked look on her face and asked me how I could tell fall was coming. I stared at her for a moment before realizing she was dead serious. So I just casually pointed out the windows and said, "It's September," and the leaves on the trees were changing color again. With a shocked look on her face, she said she had no idea different colored leaves were related to fall. I couldn't believe I was explaining seasons to someone in their late 20s. At an office job I had, an alarm went off telling us there was an active shooter. It turned out to be a false alarm, but obviously panicked everyone. The next day, some of the more conservative men near my desk were complaining about the office being a gun-free zone. If it had been real, we'd all be defenseless since they won't let us bring in our weapons. I usually keep quiet on borderline political topics, but I wasn't letting this go. I explained that if they were allowed a weapon, there was a good chance other people would bring one too. Open carry state after all. So now we've got multiple people stalking around the office with weapons drawn. Isn't everyone's instinct going to be shoot at anyone they see holding a gun when an active shooter situation is going on? And then what about when the police arrive? Do you think they are going to be judicious when they see you with a gun? Someone would have definitely gotten hurt and all for a false alarm. Hell, one of them may have even gotten blamed for starting the whole thing. They kind of sat there and said, I hadn't really thought of that. Maybe it wouldn't have been a good idea. I couldn't believe these grown men in their cowboy hero fantasies never played out that multiple people would have guns if we were allowed to have them in the building. Story 39. I teach. One day as we were going out for field day, a kid called another kid a dildo. Of course, I pull him aside and ask him if he knows what that means, and he says no. So we chat about why we don't say words we don't know the meaning of. The principal pulls me aside and asks, why was he in trouble? I explain to her the situation, and she doesn't understand what's wrong. I say, he called the other kid a dildo. She tells me that doesn't seem that bad. Turns out, she thought it was a nickname for an armadillo. Guess where we live? So I had to explain to my principal what a dildo was. Other than that, best principal I've ever had. Story 40. No, you cannot cure schizophrenia by punching a person. You cannot believe the amount of people who cannot comprehend the concept of mental illness. Some really think that if you threaten a mentally ill person with violence, they will go back to normal, because according to them, all the violent psychopaths are just hooligans who never been properly beaten. Story 41. Explaining to my wife that the heater in the car is taking heat from the thousands of tiny explosions in the engine and using it to heat the car, not costing us more petrol, but utilizing the heat already produced. So many times. Wireless thermostats need batteries. As a plumbing and heating engineer, this gets wearing. Turning on your heating, but the thermostat is not high enough, and explaining that it needs to be set high enough to call the boiler into action is something my mother has been explaining over the phone since the 70s to customers. So my father and then myself didn't have to go to that person. Flushing a toilet can be done with a bucket. It's not an emergency. If I've turned off your water, the heating will still work. Radiators will not run all day. The heating will come on with the thermostat and off when satisfied. Radiators don't get hot instantly. The radiator may not get hot at all if it is further away than others when the thermostat is satisfied. Heat from the sun will affect a thermostat. Story 42. Leap years. I dated a girl who simply couldn't comprehend that it takes approximately 365.25 days for Earth to orbit the sun. So we add an extra day to the calendar every 4 years. She didn't understand why we didn't have a short day every year. She fundamentally didn't understand basic astronomy. I tried diagrams and using different size fruit to explain it. In the end, she said she understood. I knew she didn't, and she had gotten bored. We broke up the following week. Story 43. Pediatric ER nurse. I was discharging a patient last week with instructions to monitor for fever. I work in a low-income and generally low-health literacy community, so I asked the patient's mother if they had a thermometer. We have them to give out. She asked what that was. Since there was a possible language barrier, I clarified that it was something to take a temperature and see if there's a fever. She still didn't know what that was. So I went over how to take a temperature and what numbers meant the child had a fever. I wrote out a range of numbers that were and were not fever because I really wasn't sure if she understood more than 100.2. I asked her to write down the numbers she read in case interpreting them wasn't working. I've thought about offering basic health literacy classes to parents, but it's so hard when that concept relies on basic math, science, and reading skills. Story 44. Knew a girl who was convinced and even argued with me that men must have her, otherwise they will die. It will store in the balls and they will explode. And that it is very similar to menstruation, it just must go out. Her boyfriend told her that. She was like 20. Tiny addendum. I was talking to someone who tried to convince me that his generation is better with the computers because they grew up with iPhones, whereas my generation didn't know much about them, since PC didn't exist back then. The aforementioned back then was 2004 in his dictionary. Story 45. I used to have a roommate who came from a pretty privileged background. She was finishing grad school when we met and had never had a job before. Her first job after finishing school, she came home irate and indignant because her boss had told her that she wasn't allowed to have Facebook open on her computer all day. Roommate claimed that she had never been asked to keep Facebook closed in anything like a professional or academic setting before, that she was just as productive with it open as closed, and implied that her boss was overstepping and micromanaging. I did eventually manage to convey that keeping your social media checks to a quick 5 minutes every couple of hours was an extremely normal and in fact generous guideline for a workplace to have, but the enormity of explaining all of the context for why a boss can reasonably ask an employee to keep their work computer focused on work-related materials during working hours was pretty daunting. Story 46. Worked for a major phone manufacturer. A customer called us about a defective device that was brand new. I explained she will need to call her provider as this is a warranty issue and they are contractually obliged to fulfill this. After a lot of confusing back and forth, I had to explain what warranty is. She thought I wanted her to call Sprint and ask for a man named Warranty. Story 47. An ex of mine told me that if a woman isn't a virgin when she gets married, she's supposed to wear a pink sash on her wedding dress. I asked how it was anybody else's business whether she was a virgin or not, and why she would have to signal the state of her UAL experience on her wedding day. Well, his grandmother told him that non-virgin brides always wear a pink sash. To this day, I have never seen a bride wear a pink sash. Even women who I know are on their second wedding. Story 48. Stopped by my local hardware store that I frequented doing home remodels, and was just chatting with a couple of guys working there. Older guy walks up to the counter and asks, "Is there some kind of device that you can plug into a wall outlet that makes noise so you know when you've turned off the correct circuit breaker?" I couldn't help myself, so I said, "You mean like a radio?" He promptly turned, grumbled out, "Fuck," and walked back out the door. Story 49. At an old job, I taught the office manager, who had been in her position for 10 years, how to copy and paste. Another time I taught her that downloading a document keeps a copy on your computer. She had been downloading the same few documents every time she needed them, either weekly or monthly, depending on the document. I opened up the downloads folder on her computer, and there were thousands of copies of the same few letters she used to send to customers. Even after I showed her this, she carried on downloading them from a years-old email because it was easier. Story 50. Working in an aquatic store, sold some marine fish to this bloke. It was close to a $500 sale for me. He answered all the questions regarding setup to our satisfaction. This was in the days before smartphones with non-potato cameras. Photos of setups are often asked for now. Anyway, he came back about an hour later, ranting and raving with fish bags of very dead, very expensive fish. I opened the bag and could tell immediately by smell it wasn't salt water. It has a particular scent. So I got the refractometer to check properly, and sure enough, it was fresh water. He had read enough to answer our questions to get the fish, but still thought and didn't understand that he couldn't just acclimatize a clownfish to live in freshwater. It happened damn near 20 years ago, and I still don't get how he could read something enough to memorize it, repeat it, and still not understand it. Story 51. POC immigrant turned citizen lawyer who worked with immigration and citizenship policies in Australia. The amount of times I had patiently explained that someone is doing terrible crap elsewhere isn't permission or validation for us to be relatively less shit was staggering. Sometimes multiple steps were required with supporting materials, even for Fing senators. Most of the time it devolved into personal remarks about how my origin affected my ability or consideration, like theirs hadn't, and that a real citizen would understand, even from Fing senators. Kills me that dealing with the sort of people who determine who gets and what is citizenship killed a sufficient amount of my love of the country. The worst of them may become PM soon too. Story 52. My ex's cousin had a bad accident, whilst drunk, hit his head pretty hard and had an open gash on his wrist/arm that we had to keep compressed. He was semi-conscious and complaining about a headache. Whilst I was on the phone to emergency services, I heard ex offer him 2 aspirin. I ran across the room shouting, "No!" in what felt like slow motion. Story 53. I had to explain to one former coworker that the sky didn't have a different star pattern every night. He thought the stars were in a different spot each night. He had no idea that the moon followed the same path as the sun, rises in the east and sets in the west. He's also the same guy that I got to believe there's a such thing as Arctic ticks that only come out in the wintertime and hide well in the snow. He had to look it up to see if I was lying to him.